Well, I think it stopped at some point, and it is now recording again. So
Okay.
I don't know why it would have stopped on its own.
Is the battery okay?
Should be. Maggie said it was good for an hour and a half. So. Okay, now that you've had a minute or so to just familiarize yourself with the two pieces of data here, let's dig in, and I would like to hear from you about what are we able to say. So this is the here's what we're looking for, observable facts that we can take from the information. Okay. And so while you guys are, why don't you set that timer for 5 minutes for me, and we'll see if we can come up with 5 to 7 different facts, and I'll record them over here as you guys are thinking.
Anybody else? Looking at the behavior data, it looks like that the special education referrals are a percentage of the general education referrals, but I'm thinking about how many special ed students there are in a given cohort. And even though it looks like there's a lot less from special ed versus general ed.
Okay.
Let's see, so the number on the left, the number on the left is number of students with referrals, is that correct?
Yes.
On the y-axis.
Yes. So if
So
you
I
want
think I'm
to,
still going with my gut that the number of referrals looks pretty equitable between the regular education and the special education and regular education groups. Because out of a group of 100 students, maybe 10 of them are special education students.
okay. So, like, are you considering like the ratio?
Yeah,
So really the special
So it
ed kids
looks
are getting
like-
no more write-ups than the
Right.
regular ed kids.
it looks like, say, 2 out of 10 special education, whereas actually maybe more in the, you've got 20 and 30 and 40 out of 100 for the regular education. So in a way, it looks like there's more regular education referrals
Yeah,
than
less
special education.
ed.
You said 20 out of what? For gen ed?
Yeah, getting to the other than the senior year, in the freshman, sophomore, and junior year, you have 35 to 50 out of 100, say. Students with no disabilities for regular education.
Okay. What else was
I immediately focused on the graduation data.
Yeah.
It's supposed to,
Mhm.
okay, so immediately I noticed that like 25% more students without disabilities are graduating versus students with disabilities.
Mhm.
And then I also noticed that 30% of the dropout rate was students with disabilities versus not very much students without disabilities.
Yeah.
It looks like maybe 2%, which to me is a huge difference. And I don't know if we're supposed to make assumptions, but my assumption of that would be they just got frustrated, they couldn't reach those.
Right, so for the point that we're at right now, we want to just stick with what we see and try to not get into the why quite
Okay,
yet.
okay.
So could you just repeat for me that, what you noticed about the dropout rate?
So I
And sort
noticed
of
the
be specific
dropout
with the
rate,
numbers?
30% of students with disabilities dropped out versus like 2% of students without disabilities.
No disability kids had the advanced diploma.
Okay, so be specific in terms of numbers.
0. Ended up with an advanced diploma.
versus what?
versus the 32%.
Okay, is that our timer? Too, I heard it going off.
No, not quite.
Any other observable facts, things that we can pull from our two pieces of data here?
Again, and maybe it's an assumption or I'm taking it too far, but with our students with disabilities, 30% of, say, 10 kids is really only 3 kids.
Right.
Whereas 1% of 90 kids is 1 kid.
Mhm.
So the chart shows that huge, especially in the dropout, shows a huge discrepancy between dropouts and regular ed dropouts. But yet, when we think about the actual numbers of students, I think it wouldn't be so huge.
That's the timer.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and one thing that popped out to me about this, chart over here is, like, wow, as freshmen, the number of referrals coming in for all
It's
students
huge.
regardless,
Yeah.
yeah, and then by the time they get seniors,
Mhm.
it's much lower.
Mhm.
Okay. All right, so we just listed some observable facts. That's the here's what. Now what we're going to do is look for the so what. So here's where I want to hear your surprises, the patterns you may see, developing, questions you have, other information you think we might need.
What do you mean by local? Like a local diploma is what it's saying under
Do you
graduation
guys-
rate?
Yeah, do you want to have just a moment to think and brainstorm some questions first? You ready to jump right in? It's totally up to you.
Well, how much time do we have?
5 minutes. This is the so what? Okay, so surprises, patterns, questions, more information you wish you had.
What do you mean by local diploma? Because in our world, that doesn't exist anymore, right?
They're getting
You
something,
need a T.
obviously.
There you go.
Thanks.
Why does the overall number of referrals go down? As they get older?
So here's where you can sort of like asking those why questions that could be sort of influencing or being, factors contributing that we may not see right away from this data.
Do we know why the dropouts, do we have any information about why students did drop out? Or when, at what stage?
Oh, it's true. seems like I'm trying to find the words, but, you know, like the larger amount of referrals referrals in general, like Amy said, is going down, but also like the numbers, so you're seeing less gray too, so like the severity of referrals, I'm kind of at lack of words there, but.
So maybe having a better understanding of the type of referrals behind
Yeah.
them.
Sure. Right, because that does not distinguish between
Right.
the kind of the minor,
Things and the big deals.
yeah, being late 3 times to school, I think is a
Is a
So
referral.
like
Yeah.
Is a
minor
referral.
versus suspensions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm also trying to figure out if having a combined rates for each of those, if that would be informative at all. I know it's 70% of the students with disabilities, 95% of general ed students. So what does that, what percentage does, so is that a
Overall,
overall? Yeah,
school.
I
yeah.
agree.
I think we mentioned that, so the number of referrals, okay, yeah, we fixed that there. The number of referrals are decreasing each year. Any other patterns? Surprises?
I guess the main surprise is the decrease in write-ups, but as far as like the graduation data, that didn't seem surprising to me.
Is anybody curious to know, and it came out a little bit in our conversation about our predictions and how we made them based on assumptions of who they might be, who we might be thinking about. So are some of the questions maybe related to classification of these students?
Oh, it could be, yeah.
Area of classification, program of these students?
Yeah,
Would that be information that you would
that's
find,
true, whether they're
find valuable to have?
self-contained or inclusive, or, and as far as behavior goes, do they have more of a behavioral disability, oppositional defiance, and sometimes kids with like ADHD, more impulsiveness get wrote up more. I mean, that can be applicable to dropout rates, cause you often see students who misbehave more. It seems like they're more likely to drop out, the ones with poorer attitudes, and they get more write-ups, not always, obviously, but again, picturing.
Okay. All right, so the last step in the process, we've made observable facts of the information. We've tried to pull out some patterns, other questions we have, looking at the data. The last step is the now what. So keeping these two things in consideration. The now what is where we're going to try to draw some inferences or conclusions or next steps. Okay? So remember, inferences are always based on evidence. Okay? So thinking about what we've just talked about today, what do you think would be our now what? Inferences, conclusions, or next steps? Can we get 5 more minutes on the timer too, just to, and let me know if that goes off,
Okay.
okay? So take a moment and, based on what we've looked at today, what are some inferences or conclusions we can draw? And maybe what are some next steps, so when we leave here today, things that you might want from me as we move forward.
Okay, as we approach this step, and as we did with Kai, at some point, do we need to determine a goal of what we think should be happening? Or,
For example, a goal of increasing, right? Is that what you're
yeah.
thinking? Like,
yeah,
do we need to determine a goal of increasing graduation rate for our
students with
students
disabilities?
with disabilities?
Well, I think that that would be part of what our next steps could be later on.
Okay.
So right now, we are just making those inferences or drawing the conclusions and stating them. Okay, so then once we have things stated, we then can say, okay, this is where we currently are. Now what do we wanna do?
Okay.
So right now, we need to solidify, what is the current state of being?
Mhm.
What are those conclusions we can make?
Okay, so is
That
that
will
the now
help,
what?
that will help drive our next steps and
Mhm.
our actions and our decision-making process.
Can I say a statement of like, in my opinion? Or,
Based on facts,
Given
Yes.
that-
given the
yeah.
evidence.
yes, so given the evidence that the dropout rate is 30% for our students with disabilities, it's too high in my world.
Okay.
Mhm. What else can we offer them to keep them here?
Now, I'm not saying that those dropout students necessarily need to get their diploma, but I wanna keep them here to either get their CDOS certificate or I guess in my head, I'm thinking CDOS certificate or a certificate from a BOCES program, but not them dropping out, to eliminate or greatly decrease that amount of dropout rate.
Okay.
It would be nice to see some students with disabilities achieving an advanced Regents diploma.
Yes, we didn't have any.
Based on this data, that was a 0%.
Okay, so. How could we write that as an inference or conclusion? So the conclusion would be currently no students with
students,
disabilities are receiving an advanced diploma. And so you said, what do you wanna know next? Amy, related to that?
How can we help them achieve that?
Yeah. So a lot of our kids.
Finding
take-
ways to support them.
Timer went off.
Any other inferences or conclusions? That we want to take away? I mean, I guess we touched on this a little bit when we were looking over here, actually. We talked about classification and programming. So I guess we're making, really, that fits nicely over here too. We're making an inference that there's other factors
Mhm.
that come in, that are in play
Mhm.
in terms of what our students are achieving, right?
Mhm.
So other factors such as
Program and disability.
area of disability, program. Anything else you think might be impacting?
Not that I can
Attendance,
think of that.
Yeah.
What's that?
Attendance maybe?
I was gonna say
Yeah.
attendance, I also was gonna say family support.
Okay.
Well, I was
Awareness.
thinking socioeconomic, but that would
Yeah.
affect students with disabilities and gen ed students
Both.
equally.
Yeah.
I'll write it down though. And you said, family
Family
involvement?
support, yes, family involvement.
Okay. All right, so, let's see where it goes next. So I just had these in here in case we were gonna do all this digitally, and we didn't today, we did it on the posters, but probably what I'll do is move everything off of the posters,
Mhm.
right in here, so we have it all together.
Right.
So lastly, I just wanna say thank you, for being engaged and participating with the data meeting today. The information that we talked about today and the things that we collected will help us move forward in that collaborative learning cycle process of really getting into organizing and integrating, which is generalizing theories and causation. So based on the information you shared, there's some more data, it sounds like, we would like
Mhm.
to take a look at, and that would be our next step, is to include a little more information, help us answer some of the questions that we have based on just the few pieces of data that we looked at today. All right?
Perfect.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yes, so we can finish up and just take a moment to do our group process check, and anything else for the good of the group before we leave? Okay. Thank you. I'm gonna stop the tape.
Okay.